All the college football playoff rankings have been released, and it's not one or two. In fact, it is 3 teams sitting in the latest top 25. No movement at the top in terms of the Pac-12 teams. Oregon and Utah sitting tight at 6 and 7. The good news is, from a USC perspective, they are now in that top 25, checking in at number 23. The significance of it is not just good news for SC fans. It's that Utah's loss doesn't seem as bad now that they've lost to a top 25 opponent in the Trojans, and Oregon has just one more data point to help bolster its case from one of those final 4 spots. Your biggest takeaway, Yogi, as you look at the latest poll?
Well, I think it's huge that USC is in for a bunch of reasons. One, you look at them, remember, this is their final game of the season this weekend against UCLA, so I think it's good for Clay Helton, I think it's good for this program, and I think even Washington, it would prove if they can win out their last 2 games, I'd imagine they'd be in, which is only going to help Utah's case, who went on the road. Oregon went on the road to beat UW. So overall, I look at the committee saying, yeah, they're watching the games. They're not just worried about the top 6, 8, 10 teams. And I think that bodes extremely well for this conference, because that's going to be the arguments. It's going to be a one-loss conference champ argument, as well as the Alabama, more than likely, one-loss non-conference champ that we're going to be having in 2.5 weeks.
How much are you, if you're an Oregon fan or a Utah fan, also now rooting for Washington to handle business down the stretch?
I think you are, but I think you also just have to dominate like you've been dominating. Sure. I think the committee has proven, really starting last week, and you can even say the first week of the rankings when they came out, that they recognize that Oregon and Utah are playing really good football, right? Look at the other one-loss teams, Baylor, Oklahoma, that are behind them. In years past, it could have been flipped. We saw that. Remember Washington State just a year ago, right? They were kind of just trying to knock on the door. They can never get in there. So I think the committee recognizes that they're a quality team, and the winner of that game, if we look at what we're looking at now and the info they've given us, Mike, they're in. They're going to make it to the college football playoff. Now, chaos can ensue, of course, and there's arguments that can be made, but fundamentally, if things lay out as the way we would project them, the winner of that game on a Friday night is going to the CFP.
All right, big picture this for me, because when I look at the rankings, there's usual suspects, right? LSU, Ohio State, throw Clemson in the mix, Alabama sitting at 5, Georgia sitting at number 4. Historicals. I know you've been preaching about this the last couple weeks. How much do you think that is taken into consideration in the evaluation process of these teams?
I don't think it's taken into a lot by the 13-member committee. We've sat on that committee.
Sure.
The task is find the 4 best teams this year. I think when you hear people around the country, you heard them on ESPN, everybody has a voice, everybody has a platform in every different region. They're saying, well, the style in which the Pac-12 plays needs to make sure there's a style points type of win in the title game. So think about it. Here's the history. Yeah. Pac-12, they're going to throw it all over the yard. The Big Ten, they're going to pound each other up. SEC, it's going to be extremely physical football. But overall, when you look at the criteria, it's all based on this season. I think if you study the style in which Oregon and Utah are built, Mike, they're built in a way that's kind of a throwback SEC, throwback Big Ten in terms of they're going to run the football, be physical on the offensive side with Zach Moss and the vast array of running backs at Oregon. They've got 2 of the best defenses in the country when you go look at stats, analytics, or just watch them on tape. So to me right now, the style in which history has shown each conference to play is thrown out the window. And that's what I would urge and ask other analysts and other voices to look at. Because to say that somebody needs to win with big style points in the title game, that to me is so far from the truth. And that just says to me that you're not watching how these teams are playing. Because nobody's backdooring their way into the CFP from this conference, in my opinion.
Got to earn it, and you're going to have to take it, because the Pac-12, and we've said this over the years, it feels like the wins aren't as significant in the Pac-12 conference, but the losses are just magnified differently than they are in some of the other Power 5 conferences. Take me through scheduling here, because we've continued to beat this drum. There is a significant difference, 8-game versus 9-game. A week ago, we talked to Mario Cristobal about it, baking in 6 extra losses into this conference. Kyle Whittingham had said that it is significantly tougher just because of the opponents that you're now facing. Hard to measure that when you're in that room.
Yeah, I mean, let's just look at Alabama, okay? They have one of the softer schedules in the country. They had a bye week at home, a bye week to prepare for an at-home game against LSU, the biggest game of the year.
Lost.
They lost. They gave up almost 50, right? Now they have a bye week with Mac Jones to get ready for the Auburn game. It's as good of a scenario as you can ask, where Oregon goes on the road. They got UW, then they get Washington State, then have to go on the road to USC. Nobody has to go do that. Clemson doesn't have to do that. Ohio State doesn't have to do that. LSU, you got to give them credit for their wins, but the way they're laid out, they've never necessarily had to go back to back to back difficult games like that. So I think that's important. And one might push back and say, well, none of them were ranked in the top 10, weren't ranked in the top 20. That's fair. But the challenge that they had to play against real competitive teams week in and week out is just one that doesn't exist in other conferences. So that has to be taken into consideration, let alone the 9 conference games, let alone Oregon running the table right now in Pac-12 conference play, which hasn't been done in the history of the Pac-12. So I'd like to think that when they talk about the 3 teams that are in consideration right now, or at least 5, 6, 7,
sure,
they have to talk that way. You have to be truth teller around that versus the history of Alabama. Because Alabama, they're going to look great against Auburn. They might smoke Auburn. They know, and they can gear up for 1-game seasons. But that's not what this thing is. It's the entirety of the season and finding the 4 best teams that have played the best versus played the best in moments. And I think that will be the conundrum that the committee is going to be in a couple weeks.
Yeah. Do you look at this the way that I do? It will take care of itself when we're in the Pac-12 Championship Game, assuming that there aren't 2 SEC teams. If Georgia and LSU, if that shakes out maybe the wrong way or the right way for the Pac-12 conference, you will be looking at an Oregon or Utah is one of those Final Four teams.
Yeah, I think so. I think the biggest wrench in this is if Georgia beats LSU.
Yeah.
I mean, LSU has played so well this year in terms of beating difficult teams on the road. They beat Texas on the road, they beat Alabama on the road. You got to tip your cap to them. But again, I go back to how do teams play? If I put Utah's defense up against LSU's offense, I'm really confident. If I put the offensive front of Oregon up against LSU's defense, I'm really confident. And that, to me, it's going to ask the committee to raise up and bow up a little bit and say, yeah, even if LSU does lose, they've got a lot of quality wins. But how would they face and how would they deal with 2 of the best offenses and defenses when you look at just the sheer numbers of these 2 teams? So I don't think anything's a slam dunk unless you're undefeated right now in terms of the CFP and the teams that are ranked ahead of the 2 in the Pac-12.
All right, more reaction to what has happened in the college football playoff rankings. Yogi and I have you covered every single Tuesday night inside Pac-12 football. You do not want to miss it. Look, we've had some great guests, right? Kyle Whittingham a couple weeks ago, Mario Cristobal this past week. By the way, Jonathan Smith stopping by the show, his team knocking on the door of bowl eligibility. So we got you covered once again every Tuesday night on Pac-12 Network.